Hello again. So now let's discuss chapter 14, Europe and the Atlantic World. So at this point in time, basically coming off of, I believe it's chapter 12, if not chapter 11 in Western Civ 1, we start talking about the movement of peoples. We talk about the movement of crops and plants that are coming to the New World. So let's talk about how the colonies first started. So the colonies first started in Europe, specifically as a point of expansion. So that was basically due to heavily overpopulation and also due to the fact that some of the countries within Europe, specifically Spain and Portugal, wanted to find areas where they can have cash crops. So the ideal first colonies that started were, of course, off the coast of Africa. So we're talking about the Canary Islands, the Madeira Islands, the Azores. Those are places that the first colonies are going to be founded. Those colonies specifically are going to be catered to cash crops. And the award-winning cash crop that they're going to have right there, of course, is sugar. So sugar is highly needed within Europe for use of teas and other things. So because of that, those colonies are going to start to prosper. Later on, as the chapter continues, we'll start to see that they're going to expand even further across the Atlantic. So into the New World. So we're talking about expansion into the Caribbean islands, of course, into South America, and then later on into North America as well. The book also talks about a term called the Columbian Exchange. The way to think about the Columbian Exchange, it's basically the exchange of movements of peoples, plants, animals, and diseases, of course, between the Old and the New World. Basically things that are coming from the Old World, which is, as we know, Europe, and then the New World, meaning the new colonies that are starting to form within North America, South America, and then, of course, in the Caribbean. There's also a map within the textbook that also provides kind of so you can kind of see the movement of those types of products and peoples. But there's also a chart as well within the chapter that kind of shows what was exchanged. One of the first groups to get involved in the movement, of course, is Spain. So Spain is going to start settling within South America and the Caribbean, and of course the southern portions of North America. So that territory is going to be known as New Spain. The book talks about the encomienda system, which is the government system that they had at that point in time. It also talks about the intermingling between Spaniards and, of course, the indigenous people, the Africans that were residing there as well because of the movement of peoples and slaves, and then, of course, the Creoles as well. The English, of course, were the last to settle the New World, and the reason why they settled. So a lot of the first people from England that ended up settling, of course, wanted religious freedom. So if we go back to the last chapter, we learned about King Henry VIII, we learned about Mary Tudor, we learned about other leaders within England that caused a little bit of strife and panic. So like I mentioned before, depends on the ruler. So if you have a Protestant ruler and you're Catholic, you're going to be persecuted. And then likewise, the same thing would happen if you had a Catholic ruler. So because of that, the first people that ended up leaving England, they wanted religious freedom. So the only way to get it was to actually move into the New World. So they were one of the first to actually, expand outward. And of course, they're expand more northward. So we're talking about like the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Plymouth Rock, those types of areas that they're going to start settling in. The book also talks about the impact of the slave trade. The slave trade is not something that's new. The only difference now is that the slave trade is going across oceans now. That's the only main difference. Slavery has been in existence since, chapter 1. If you ever take chapter 1 of Western Civ 1 or have memories of that, we basically talk about it, with the ancient Babylonians. We talk about it with other groups as well. So slavery is not a new topic. It's just the simple fact that now it's becoming more, I guess you can say, transatlantic in this point in time. Okay, so of course it's going to have an impact. In terms of Europe, so Europe basically relied heavily on these colonies. They also relied on the dependence of gold and silver. So as products were basically moving around, they also needed the gold and the silver to basically bring back wealth back to the main country, to Spain, to Portugal, and elsewhere. So the economies were basically heavily dependent on that. Another topic that the book talks about is the 30 Years' War, which the 30 Years' War was kind of lined up to occur, unfortunately. It was basically fought between England and France and their allies. Specifically, the reasons why it was fought was basically disputes over rulers and also disputes over territory. So basically, in a nutshell that I would think about it is that basically you have an English ruler that basically said, hey, I can be on the French throne too at the same time because, I'm a bloodline of a cousin of a ruler. So basically, I can can have two rulers ruling at the same time. I could be an English king, and I can also be the king of France as well. And same thing can happen if France wanted to take over in England. They also had disputes over territory as well. This was through a series of dynastic marriages and through a variety of other things as well. So because of that, there was constant animosity that occurred. And specifically, since we're talking about Western Civ 2, the animosity between England and France is basically going to last up until the World Wars. So we're talking about centuries of going back and forth and having hostility between these two nations. Okay. After the war was fought and kind of got stalemated, there was a lot of different things that ended up happening specifically in France. So one of those individuals was Cardinal Richelieu. Cardinal Richelieu played a important fact as he was the de facto successor to King Louis XIII. King Louis XIII, unfortunately, he was really young. He was only 9 years old at the time. So Cardinal Richelieu was basically his chief advisor. He was the one that would kind of lead him in the right direction. So a couple things that he ended up doing was that he amended the Edict of Nantes, which basically did not support the right of the Huguenots. The Huguenots is basically another word for French Protestants. So once again, we have this thing coming up into fruition where religion plays a role. So once again, now Protestants in France are becoming persecuted because of the leadership. Cardinal Richelieu also imposed heavy taxation on people as well. So that's going to cause a lot of revolts. And it's also going to cause future struggles that's going to face France for quite a bit of time as well. England is also going to face a civil war after the 30 Years' War as well. This was due to a variety of different things as well. So the taxation system basically led to debt. So as you think about it, if they're fighting in so many wars, taxes are going to have to be levied to basically pay for the wars, pay for the reparations, pay for the armies, pay for everything else that they needed. At the point in time of the Civil War, Elizabeth I was the ruler. She was actually succeeded by her cousin James Stuart. So that was James VI of Scotland. The reason why she was succeeded by the Stuart dynasty was a simple fact is that she was known as the Virgin Queen. She did not get married. She did not have children. So because of that, a family member did have to take over. And of course, that was James. James, of course, was not the most inept ruler at this point in time. He actually imposed more taxes on the English people. He also caused religious divisions as well. So it was basically Calvinist versus Protestant versus Church of England, because basically at this point in time, England still is made up of various different religions that people are trying to worship. So some of them, of course, are being persecuted, which is why one of the main reasons the Puritans actually left England, and they were the ones to settle in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, kind of what I mentioned earlier. Okay. In 1625, James was actually succeeded by his son Charles. Charles actually married the Catholic sister of Louis XIII of France. So because of that, that's also going to cause animosity once again, because you have England and France coming to the forefront because of a dynastic marriage between the two. It's also going to launch other wars as well with Spain. So once again, Spain's also going to come involved too within this whole entire big battle and war. It's also going to cause a lot of financial troubles for both of the three countries as well. So basically, they were kind of caught between a hard place. Do we tax more? Do we need to levy more taxes? What do we need to do to kind of fix the economic strife that's occurring on? And basically, the nutshell is to just stop all the wars, stop all the conflicts. Then you wouldn't have to worry about all of this taxation as well. So basically, Parliament also became divided on the question of monarchs' role in government. Back in, I think it's chapter 10 of Western Civ 1, we talk about the role of the Magna Carta. So the Magna Carta was actually signed by King John because King John became too much of an absolute ruler where he was constantly levying taxes. And then what ended up happening was that people ended up becoming, poverty stricken because of it, and he was living in the lap of luxury. So the Magna Carta basically created a checks and balances system on the monarchy. So what that would mean is that once again, the Parliament basically felt that the monarchs were becoming too absolute, that all power would reside with them. So once again, they were kind of fearful of that this was going to happen once again that happened in the past. So we don't want history to repeat itself, even though it does. They kind of wanted to mitigate that from happening again. Okay. So what ended up happening is that, as I mentioned, there's religious conflict that's going on in England, during the Civil War. So there's going to be an individual named Oliver Cromwell. So Oliver Cromwell, he's the leader of the Protestant dissenters, those people that did not agree with the monarchy. They didn't agree with what was going on. So they basically renewed that same civil war in 1648. So they started it off from scratch once again. So Charles, who was the leader at that point in time, James's son, he was actually beheaded because people didn't care for him, unfortunately. Cromwell abolished the House of Lords. He also declared England to be a commonwealth. Which basically meant is that now it is not a monarchy. There's no monarch ruling. So it would basically be a commonwealth in that point in time. So the aftermath of what that ended up happening was that people actually became nostalgic for the old way. They really didn't care for the way that Cromwell was ruling the country. They didn't care for his maneuvers that he ended up doing in office and those types of things. So Cromwell actually died in 1658, and then King Charles II was restored as ruler. So he's of the same line, not the same guy that was beheaded. He can't, recreate himself, but it was his son that actually took over, and he basically revived the Church of England as the main religion within England at that point in time. Okay. The chapter also discusses witchcraft. So witchcraft, they're going to talk about it within England, and they're also going to talk about it in terms of Salem, Massachusetts, and what was happening on as the Puritans and other groups ended up settling within Massachusetts Bay and elsewhere. The book also discusses Thomas Hobbes' worlds of theater, artists, Dutch paintings. There's a lot of different artistic things that are also discussed in chapter 13 that you'll read about as well. Okay, so just think about those things as you're going through your PowerPoint, as you're going through your readings, so that way you can kind of focus on why these wars were fought, why people were moving, and then why religion played an important role as well. Okay, thanks.